Russia is growing. Went from 2009, 770,000 hectare, up to 1,700,000, 70,000, excuse me, and I guess we will go slowly where the 1.1, 1.2 for Russia. So if you go to the yields, so what I just said before, again, blue is for France, the yellow for the Ukraine, and the red is for Russia. That will be on all the slides like this, on all the graphs. So you see France had in 2009 a yield of 4.4 tons, 870 kilos of yield per hectare, which is very high and normal for France. It's no exclusion. So if you go to the Ukraine and Russia, yes, they're more or less the same, 1.7, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. But you see in 2011 for France, it went down to 3.7. So that's why the farmers were disappointed about what they got. And they said, okay, we stop growing peas. So if we go to the, I have to push the button, I forgot this, sorry about it. So this is then the yields again. So the blue one, what I said before, France, you 4.8, 4.6, and the red and the yellow are Russia and the Ukraine, which are then stable. So we go now to the production. The production in Russia, 1.7 million tons, 1.8 nearly for 2012. And I foresee, and I really think that we will go fast to 2.2, maybe 2.5 million tons in Russia. Russia has been a good supplier. Quality was good this year, was no problem. So they will be a country which you have to count on. Before you had to count on France. France had in the early 90s had 3.5 million tons. 3.5 million tons, more than Canada. Today, Canada has 2.7 for next year. 2 million tons. France is falling back to 375,000 tons 375,000 tons. Excuse me, 675,000 tons last year, and they go to 680 because they might have a better yield next year, but the area is going down, yield might be going up, so they might have the same production of 680,000 tons next year. Ukraine will come back to its normal production, which is around the 450,000, 500,000 tons. And what I said before, Russia, you have to count on it, that will be one of your main competitors for, I presume, for Canada. So the chickpeas in Russia, I got those figures from Stud Publishing from Mr. Brian Clensley. So they're quite stable. You can see they are 50,000 tons production in 2009, went a little bit down because of the weather. But normally you have a production of 50,000 tons, of which most of it will be exported. Most of it will be exported to where? In containers, to Asia, Middle East. They don't have much uses themselves in the country. So now the exports. I don't have any data from Russia. Unfortunately, impossible to get them. The only figures we have is from Ukraine and from France. And you see from 2009 up to 2011, more or less, the difference in export between feed and food is more or less the same. It's always 50% food, 50% feed, except for 2010. But if you think, okay, where's the feed going for export? The feed is going as yellow peas for fish food. The same quality which we're shipping, France is shipping to India, we send it to Norway for fish food. They want yellow peas. They want good quality yellow peas, and that's why they have, it's in a way it's wrong, the figures, because yellow peas for fish food are feed and not food. But I think they're the same quality as the yellow peas to India. And if we see the Ukraine is really feed. You see in 2011, 80,000 tons export, of which 70,000 tons has gone to 70,000 ton export has gone to Italy, to Spain, and that's mostly for compound feed. It's really feed quality. So this is the summary, a summary which is from 2009 to 2012. You see France, 545,000 tons, up to 1 million tons. Why 1 million tons in 2010 suddenly? Why an increase of so much? Why twice the production? Because of the subsidy. France has created a subsidy because they said, okay, in the early 90s, we had 3.5 million tons. We're going back so fast, we need to grow more peas. So we gave a subsidy, which was an envelope of a couple of million euros. And that was divided by the hectare you got. So all the farmers were calculating. So that is my envelope, 2.5 million euros, whatever it was, divided by the number of hectares. So I get 150 euros per hectare. Everyone was thinking that. So everyone was planting peas. So in 2010, they doubled the production. So they get half the subsidy because the envelope was the same. You had to only divide it by more acreage. So that's why it went down. And that will stop by this year. This is the last year we get the subsidy, but farmers they're not interested anymore. They're so disappointed by the French farmers, so disappointed by the yield of 3.7 against the wheat price. So and also the pea price in France nowadays, since 2 years, I will come back to that later on the price discussion, on the panel discussion for the prices for next year. So it's all priced over the wheat future market. So peas since last year and this year, farmer, you don't talk of a flat price, you talk about wheat price. So what is, depending on the price for the peas, is the wheat price. It's not the supply and demand for peas, no, it's just the wheat price. Everything's over the wheat price. If you guarantee a farmer that he will get $150 more than the wheat price, he will grow peas like crazy. But that's not the case today. Today, you're about $90, $100 over the wheat price. So that's why farmers are not interested. They have 8 tons a hectare for wheat. They have 4.5 a hectare for peas. So double they get for the wheat. It's cheaper to grow peas. It's more expensive to grow wheat. But okay, it doesn't calculate. Farmers not interested. So coming back to the Ukraine, you see the figures are stable, 467, 452, 377 because of the dry weather in 2011, and in 2012, 472,000 tons. Russia is increasing every year a bit. In acreage, we started before. They had a good year in 2009, 1.3 million, 1.2 in 2010, 1.8 in 2011. And 2012, I think if they have a good crop, they can grow 2 million tons. And out of that 2 million tons, they can export easily. They export already a lot also to Norway, to Denmark for the starch, because we have a big starch industry in Europe nowadays. I think Europe will use 450,000 tons of peas for starch. But why? Why peas? Because peas are gluten-free. And you have a huge demand for flour, gluten-free, and for yogurts, where you have your starch into the yogurts, which are gluten-free. So that's why you have an increase in demand, which is going from 5 years ago, 150,000 tons, we are now to 450,000 tons. So I think that's for today. So thank you very much. And if there's any question, I will be on the panel discussion for the prices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dongen. I would now request the audience, the floor is open for discussion. I would now request the audience to ask any questions which they would like. Address the speakers and kindly indicate your name so that we know who is asking what. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question then. Mies van Dongen, I have a question for you. You ended your presentation talking about the increase in demand for flour and fractions from peas, in part because of the interest in gluten-free. And as we all know, countries around the world are facing issues with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. I'm interested in your view on how food companies in Europe might continue their interest in looking at pulses for more processed foods. you have any sense? I mean, you're seeing new plant construction for fractionation. Any sense on how big that market could get?
I think that market can go, what we said before, we were 150,000 tons only 4 or 5 years ago for starch. It's okay? For starch. So we are now today, we're 450,000 tons of usage, which is mostly in Germany, Belgium, and France. Because France is for the consumer a big, huge market for yogurts. Not only yogurts, but you have the flour, you have the starch which you put into the yogurt, you have the flour which you make biscuits. And I don't know how many of you were in Barcelona last year on the Sicils. One of the producers there had a very good presentation. It was called Rocket. I don't know if Gordon remembers, and she had a very good presentation. I think she could do it better than I do talk about it, but that's an increasing market. This company in France, we started with 25,000 tons 4 years ago. They're now at nearly 100,000 tons per year. So that's an increasing market and an increasing demand for very, very special products.
And Mies, maybe I would just add to that. We had the opportunity to visit a few food companies here in the Mumbai area, and this interest in improving health with addition of pulse flours to crackers, biscuits, and other food products is also of interest here in India. So I think on a global basis, this is something that we're already seeing in China. We're seeing in Europe, and increasingly, I think, as we learn more in the pulse industry, we have this opportunity to be increasing demand in this processed food market. So I think it's really one to watch, and we often tend to look at demand by country, and I think that we need to think a little bit about demand by end use, and instead of maybe look at demand by country, we should be looking at demand for flour, demand for starch, demand for protein, because some of those numbers that were small a few years ago are now becoming very significant.
Is there any other question from the audience, please? Yeah,
Good
please.
morning. Thank you. I'm Jean Shirinda from Mozambique Embassy in Delhi. My question is from the company from US. I want to know if your company have any strategy or any kind of plan to the African market.
I wouldn't say that, I certainly wouldn't say that we'd ever not consider it. We're always looking, the United States is primarily an exporter of pulses, and we're always looking for new markets. We've kind of been on an increase in production in pulses over the last 5 years with the exception of our weather issues, but we think it's a viable market, and there has been some product moving in that direction slowly.
Good afternoon. Naresh Shah from Virani Foods, UK. We are millers of chickpeas and yellow peas. My question is to the Australian gentleman. Recently, we've had issues with desi chickpea or chana dal mainly. The issue is there's a lot of contamination from gluten. We're supposed to be gluten-free supplies coming out of Australia. We've now seen several cargoes which have higher than normal contamination for gluten. So is there any way where you can assure us that the supply chain from Australia is secure? We've been told by shippers that because chickpeas are grown in rotation and there is always possibility of that wheat or barley is being in the system. Can you give us some assurance? Because we are facing regulatory pressure where we say it's gluten-free. It has to be below a detectable level. Thank you.
That's a very tough question. I guess it depends where that contamination of gluten is coming from. If you're suggesting it's coming from cereal, from contact with cereals, then I guess anything coming out of our central handling system will always have that potential to have that contamination. I'm quite certain I know of 2 or 3 packing facilities, if we're talking containers, in Australia where they can properly segregate. But yeah, to be honest, I'd like to know a lot more detail about where the contamination is really coming from before you could really answer that question in detail. To be honest, it's the first I've heard of it.
If I could just make what I understand from European regulation perspective is that to be considered gluten-free, it has to be below 20 parts per million. And this is getting at this issue of tolerance levels for whether they're contaminants or residues of one kind or another. I think we're having a panel discussion to talk specifically about some of the issues related to India, but it is an important question, I guess, in terms of how, as an industry, we can meet some standards. But I'd be interested in talking to you a little bit more just to understand your understanding of below level of detection versus some of these regulations that we've looked at in the food industry, specifically about looking at the gluten-free market. My understanding was that it was a new regulation in Europe, which was 20 parts per million, which was in fact what